Good morning, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to GW Institute for Korean Studies, or GWIKS. I'm Yeon-ho Kim, Associate Director of GWIKS. And thank you for joining our Korea Policy Forum. This forum is part of the policy program at GWIKS, focusing on discussing current Korea-related policy issues in the domestic, regional, and global context. And today's topic, I think, perfectly fits this whole idea. And today's forum is co-sponsored by the East Asia National Resource Center at GW and the U.S. China Policy Institute at Aju University in South Korea. With that, let me turn it over to Jisoo Kim, Director of GWIKS, and Hoongyu Kim, Director of U.S. China Policy Institute, for opening welcome remarks. Thank you. Jisoo.
Thank you, Yono. We are very delighted to host today's Korea Policy Forum event on the issue of multilateral cooperation in Northeast Asia in the Biden era. Since late April, we have been preparing a series of events related to the upcoming Biden-Moon summit that will take place this Friday on the 21st. Last Friday, we hosted a panel with distinguished speakers on the U.S. ROK relations, challenges and opportunities under the Biden administration. We had fruitful discussions focusing on the U.S. and the two Koreas. Today, which is the final Korea Policy Forum event of this academic year already, we are privileged to have another group of distinguished speakers who can discuss a broader topic on the issue of multilateral cooperation in Northeast Asia under the Biden administration. Today's discussion will be more comprehensive, not only geographically, but also thematically. It will cover from trade, science, energy, climate change to regional security cooperation. I would like to thank our distinguished speakers for being with us today. I'd like to offer my special thanks to Professor Hoongyu Kim, who is the director of the U.S. China Policy Institute at Aju University. I am so grateful for his support. We have been co-sponsoring several events throughout this academic year on the crucial issues related to the Korean Peninsula. It is always so delightful to be working with him and his institute. We hope to continue our collaboration the next academic year as well. Before I end my remark, I would like to mention that our Korea Policy Forum is made possible by the generous grant from the KDI School of Public Policy and Management. I would also like to thank Yono and our staff who have worked so hard throughout the academic year to organize many policy events that generated critical discussions. Thanks again for all your hard work. Now I'll turn it over to Professor Hoongyu Kim.
Okay, good morning for my American friends, and then good evening for my Korean friends. Thank you for your participation in spite of hectic schedules. I am very much delighted to have our third Korea Policy Forum right before the first South Korea and U.S. summit meeting held on May 21st. This Friday, at the critical juncture of our bilateral relations. The U.S. China Institute at Aju University has worked with the Institute for Korean Studies at George Washington University quite regularly after our first meeting on September 21st, 2020, when the bilateral relationship between South Korea and the United States was severely shaken under the Trump administration at the moment. I strongly believe that our discussion helped the intellectual communities of both countries better understand each other and open the window for further cooperation. In the process, I got tremendous help from Yeon-ho Kim, Deputy Director of the GWIKS. I pay respect to your working ethics and eagerness to make our roundtable discussions more productive. I'm also fully aware of full support of Jisoo Kim, Director of the GWIKS. Without your support, nothing possible. Anyway, thank you very much again. And then I sincerely hope all of participants and audience from both countries enjoy today's discussions. I really invite the best people from Korea, so I hope you can enjoy our discussions. You are all in my prayer. Thank you.
Thank you, Hoongyu. From now on, I'm going to call the first names of all the Korean respected professors. Is not that perfect for the Korean culture, but I think that'll be better for our global audience. And with that, let me move on to our first roundtable, which is on the regional cooperation on trade, science, technology, energy, and climate change. And then let me turn it over to Hung-Gyu for moderating the first roundtable. Hung-Gyu.
Okay, thank you very much. Hi, everyone again. It's me, Hung-Gyu Kim. The first subject we deal with in this session is regional trade and energy cooperation. There are two sub-subjects on science and technology and on energy and climate change. These issues are the new areas. Both countries really need to strengthen our cooperation during the year of the U.S. China strategy competition. Due to the time constraints, I would like to ask the presenters to make the presentation in 5 minutes and discussant to the discussion in 2 minutes. Sorry, to give you such a short time. And then if you need an additional comment, please limit it on 1 minute. I'm very much honored to invite Christine Bekasi as the first presenter, associate professor at the University of Maine. And also I invite the best experts on Korean side as well, Youngja Bae, professor at the Konkuk University on science and technologies. And then I also ask right after this presentation, I would like to invite Jason Lee, Dean and Zhang Monet Chair at the Graduate School of International Studies of Korea University, and also Jane Nakano, Senior Fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies on Energy and Climate Change, consecutively due to the time constraints. So I'm sorry to give you such a short time, but anyway, as much as time allows, of course, I will do the Q&As as well. And so please, Christine Bekasi, you're going to be the first, please.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction, and I'll get right into it so as not to waste my 5 minutes. So what I'm going to talk about in these opening comments is to think about what multilateral cooperation in science and technology and more broadly speaking, trade and economy might look like under a Biden administration, and some potential ways that we could see things going well, and also some potential roadblocks that might come into play. So as we know, the pandemic really brought into new awareness of supply chain vulnerabilities, particularly thinking about first things like PPE, but now of course, things like vaccine supply chains as well. But these were combined with already existing tensions that arose from great power transition dynamics between the United States and China, including increasing distrust and a move initially from China, but now maybe also from the United States, to becoming more self-reliant or moving towards more domestic market dependence rather than export reliant economies. But there's also dynamics of mutual techno-nationalism in the United States and China. And all of these things have led to more of a potential for countries to perhaps try and go it alone, but there's also a lot of possibilities, I think very good possibilities, for a deepened multilateral cooperation in science and technology across the Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific region. So Biden has a disposition towards multilateralism that, of course, President Trump did not have. And this presents ample opportunities at this moment with many different crises. But again, success here is not foregone. And a sort of go-it-alone protectionism is still one possible path that we need to think about. So I think it's important for us to think about what do we mean by multilateralism in science and technology. So there's at least 3 different ways to think about this. One way is just to think about it as mutual interdependence in component manufacture. So for example, thinking about semiconductors and how the chemical processes might be manufactured in one country and other components in another country, and then they're put together in a third country. So we could have, so just that private sector supply chain is mutual interdependence and a form of multilateralism. Or in risky and complex supply chains, for example, in critical minerals, where they might be mined in one country, processed in another country, recycled in a third country, put to end use in another country. But then when we think about multilateralism, there's also possibilities of institutionalization, and these might be through trade institutions or investment treaties, bilateral or multilateral investment treaties. And these can contain things like shared production standards, things like shared ISO standards for production, for example. So a semiconductor or a chip manufactured in one country could automatically be assumed to have the same standards as a chip manufactured in another country, or a formalization or institutionalization of shared rules across countries. So we have these different things. And two of these, this institutionalization of say ISO standards or IPR rules, are things that need to happen through institutions, perhaps institutions like the CPTPP, as I know some people will be talking about in later remarks, or perhaps some other form of rulemaking that we haven't seen yet. So there's a lot of different possibilities under any of these frameworks, but perhaps the most under the sort of private sector mutual interdependence framework for cooperation in the region, particularly between the United States, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. All of these countries to different degrees are right now going through supply chain reviews, thinking about places where there are strategic choke points or block points, places where if there was a blockage, it might have national security or public health implications. These are things like semiconductors, of course, but there's also things with biotechnology and the new wave technologies, 5G, 6G, artificial intelligence, things like this. When Prime Minister Suga visited the United States, he and Biden discussed and put forth this comprehensive and resilient partnership proposal, the U.S.-Japan Core Partnership, that involves technological cooperation, and perhaps in a bilateral fashion on these. When President Moon meets with Biden, we can expect very similar kinds of discussion, and I know that groundwork for that is already happening, and I think we'll discuss some of the details moving forward today. So there's different ways that we could think about this. One is right now, what we see is the United States reaching out sort of bilaterally and building these bilateral, perhaps private networks. The United States could also try and plug into the network of multilateral supply chains and supply chain networks that already exist in East Asia, or we could see perhaps something else. The United States could try and plug back into existing institutional frameworks, for example, move into the CPTPP, but I do think that in the near future that's unlikely, and we're not likely to see formal institutionalization. So under the US under Biden, we have elements, new moves towards, or maybe the return to the old moves towards multilateralism. There's certainly a stated commitment to multilateralism and cooperation across borders with science and technology goals. But there's also elements of mercantilism and also continued elements of that remaining from the Trump era. So for example, Section 232 national security tariffs, for example, on steel haven't been removed. So we still have, maybe not this sort of the statement towards a commitment towards openness is not all that we see. We also see other language, for example, in the proposed infrastructure bill that suggests all things will be made in and for the USA, which is not a commitment to multilateralism as much as seeming moves towards self-reliance. So I do think that there's possibilities moving forward to cooperate with sensitive technologies, and particularly to avoid these choke points, to avoid severe economic disruption, particularly if tensions with China do deepen. But there's also moves towards some mercantilism in the United States. And there's also, of course, existing tensions within the region. It's not just a group of happy democracies all trading and cooperating together. For example, thinking about the South Korea, Japan export control issues of the past. So as we move forward, I think there's a lot of new possibilities and there's movements towards that, but we also need to really keep in mind these existing problems of mercantilism and the specter of self-reliance rearing its head. I'll stop my opening remarks there. Thank you.
You're muted, Hongyu.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for your efficiency and then efforts to make the time in, okay, then Youngja Bae, please, your turn.
Hi, I'm Youngjae. I'm honored to join this online roundtable discussion. Have a chance to hear from all of you. I'm going to talk about a multilateral technological cooperation in Northeast Asia, especially on the semiconductor sector from Korean perspective. The conflict over semiconductor between US and China has escalated since the Trump administration. As you know well, the President Biden signed an executive order reviewing the risk of global semiconductor supply chain and added a few Chinese chip companies related to supercomputer institutions to the entity list in April. The Biden administration has also worked with allies to develop a strategy to confront China, trying to promote bilateral and multilateral cooperation with the Asian countries. Samsung Korea and TSMC from Taiwan were invited to the White House Semiconductor CEO meeting in last April and have been requested to collaborate to solve the problem of chip shortage. The critical emerging technology working group was formed within the Quad to discuss critical technology supply chains among the member countries. After the summit, President Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Suga committed to further strengthening the U.S.-Japan alliance to expand cooperation on sensitive supply chains under U.S.-Japan core partnership. President Biden and President Moon are expected to discuss U.S.-Korean cooperation on the semiconductor as a key agenda in their first summit this week. When we're talking on the prospects of multilateral technological cooperation in the Northeast Asia, I think we need to think about, first of all, what the goal of multilateral cooperation is. If the multilateral cooperation aims to counter China's technological rise, I think it could be successful only in the short term. It's true that U.S. strategy to put pressure on China with its allies, such as Taiwan and South Korea, has been successful, so that Chinese semiconductor companies have been faced with the great difficulty of proper supplies of high-performance chips. However, at the same time, the semiconductor firms in the US and its allies have also suffered from the decreased export to Chinese markets. The US-led export regulation on high-tech have worked so far, but as the firms' losses in the US and the other allies have accumulated and the Chinese government and firms have started to invest enormously in domestic technological innovation, it might not work for a long time. I guess it would be better for US and Asian countries to set a long-term goal of multilateral technological cooperation to strengthen their innovation capacity rather than focus on delaying the rise of China. Another thing I want to mention is about how the US-led multilateral technological cooperation would link to US-China decoupling. US, China, and other Asian countries have formed a highly interdependent relationship within the global value chain over the past decade. The Korean and Taiwanese semiconductor firms, which have been maintaining very close relationship with both the United States and Chinese companies, are currently feeling pressure by both the United States and US and Chinese government to invest more in their countries. If the global value chain becomes artificially separated by a technology alliance and other policy initiatives, I think the cost and damage would be returned not only to Chinese, but also to American and other Asian companies. When we consider the complex interdependent relationship among US, China, and Asian countries, it could be difficult to be optimistic as to whether US-led multilateral technology cooperation could be solid and sustainable if it excludes the Chinese market, one of the most dynamic and the largest market in the world economy. I think that the US-led multilateral technological cooperation could work well when the scope of technology export restriction is limited and US-China decoupling proceed to a moderate level, which could manage it by the norms and institutions of liberal economic order. In the coming summit, I hope the President Biden and Moon could find a way to identify and develop US-Korean technological cooperation based on liberal economic order for guaranteeing mutual benefit. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we have to jump on the climate change and energy issues, which is maybe the new area both countries to strengthen their cooperation. And then so after the presentation, we are gonna have Q&A and discussions. Okay, then Jason, please.
Thank you. And once again, thanks for George Washington University for organizing, and also the Ajit University and Professor Kim and Director Kim for organizing this wonderful meeting. Okay, this is a sprinter session, so I will jump into the track right away. Okay, what I would like to talk about today is the rising geopolitics of climate change and the prospect of multilateralism, especially in East Asia, focusing on the United States and in China. The most notable multilateral governance in climate change area is the Paris Agreement. And the United States has rejoined the Paris Agreement from the day one of the Biden administration. However, I would like to mention today not just the road to Paris, but actually the road from Paris in the forthcoming years. Okay. United States and China are the two biggest carbon emitters in the world. When combined, they comprise 45% of fossil fuel-based emission in the world. And nowadays, China produces more greenhouse gases than the United States and Europe combined. So the Chinese participation in the regime is essential for effective global governance, global climate change governance. And but still, the United States doubled China in per capita emission. They are the big two. And until the Trump administration, according to NDC rating, maybe two words may symbolize both China and the United States in the climate change regime. One is problematic performance, and the second one is blame game. Okay. According to NDC rating, the Chinese assessment is so far highly insufficient in the Paris Agreement. United States, critically insufficient. Okay, so some problematic performance so far, but the both sides actually, they in a sense blamed each other. So, sufficient or insufficient, how much is sufficient, or voluntary or compulsory measure. So, there has been some debate, but nowadays, both the Biden administration and China are taking a very similar path, at least verbally. That is net zero pledge. Okay, Biden administration announced net zero pledge, and what that means net zero emission by 2050 and 100% zero emission vehicle, Clean Air Act, and etc. And China also announced at the 75th UN General Assembly in 2020 that they would reach carbon neutrality by 2060. So, this is somewhat far away, but they certainly join in a global, a relay of global carbon neutrality pledge. So they are in the same boat at least. And the United States and China began well, they are back in the climate change diplomacy. And the two symbolic the person is, one is John Kerry from the United States side, and the other is Xie Zhenhua from China, who actually cooperated in the Paris Agreement, in signing the Paris Agreement. So all the partners met together. So that means China is taking care of this climate diplomacy quite seriously. So, and on a recent climate summit, Xi Jinping also joined in the summit that was last month. So the United States and the China, well, and China are in a cooperative path. Well, I would say, well, to some degree, climate change is less conflictual than military competition and less conflictual than other technological competition. However, when we go beyond the rhetoric, carbon agenda can be converted anytime to trade and investment barrier. And climate change is also deeply intertwined with technology competition that now bedevils U.S. China relations. So climate change agenda can be both cooperative and conflictual. And the moment of truth did not come yet. Main economic and political issue may emerge when cross-border, for example, cross-border carbon tax and other carbon-related regulations will emerge on the surface. And the United States, together with the European Union, want to set a strict rule to regulate the participant. That China may not want. China may continue its low carbon the track, but China wants to keep her one speed and modality, and at least want to have a partial control over it. So a simple pressure regime may not work. Multilateral cooperation beyond the Paris Agreement would certainly reduce political cost, especially like-minded countries. But we have to seriously ask what kind of multilateralism will define the geopolitics between the U.S. and China. Certainly they have a choice of moving into the cooperative or the coalition path. Finally, I will wrap up with one very interesting survey from European Investment Bank. Who is leading the fight against climate change? They asked the European citizen, the US citizen, and the Chinese citizen. European citizens replied that 66% of European citizens, 2/3, said that the European Union is leading the climate change. United States, 49%. What about China? 90%, 90, not 9. That means Chinese people, at least, at this moment, they do not think that China is far behind. In a sense, with the climate change nationalism, in a sense, they are saying China is active and China is doing a good job in dealing with the climate change. So that is one interesting kind of perception data we need to consider in this geopolitical competition. I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is a very interesting, remarks. Even though Chinese leader Xi Jinping, confirmed they are gonna accomplish their target by 2060, but the image of Chinese or perception of Chinese leading role as in the climate change is reached the 90%. That's I don't know how.
Well, that was just one survey, and you may or may not give a credibility on that number, but that actually explain a number of meetings with the Chinese experts in this field during the past few years.
Okay. Anyway, Jane Nakano may explain this, and then and also.
Hi, Jane.
And I also hope you can suggest how we cooperate each other, in the summit meeting, and then what kind of issues we can deal with. Okay, please, thank you for joining us. Anyway,
Thank you very much for having me. I'll try my best. But the Biden administration has takes climate change very seriously, and in my view, there's a great scope for bilateral cooperation between the United States and South Korea to really facilitate this energy transition in Northeast Asia and beyond the region. But in my view, climate change, international partnerships, and this U.S. China rivalry that a few of my colleagues have already mentioned are the top 3 factors that will shape the U.S. energy engagement with South Korea under the Biden administration. So, the climate is a high priority for actually both, I think, the Biden administration and the Moon government in South Korea. And to have several agenda in common, I think Jason already mentioned, they both have this mid-century carbon neutrality commitment. But then they both have very strong support for this innovation and deployment of the clean energy and renewable sources of energy. It's interesting to me that how the Biden, before I guess Biden administration came about, it was Moon government already announced that South Korea's mid-century carbon commitment in October. Obviously, before before anyone really knew what would happen with the U.S. presidential election result. And South Korea's clean energy deployment target includes this very strong commitment to increasing the number of electric vehicles. I think the target is a little over 1 million by 2025. Also, there is a strong push for renewable energy, especially this massive offshore wind farm in South Korea. And likewise, the Biden administration seeks to expand its the wind power, offshore wind power, and the current idea, the target is 30 gigawatt offshore wind by 2030. And also under this American Jobs Plan, which is this 2.3 trillion US dollar climate related, sort of a climate resilient infrastructure plan that was announced in late March. The Biden administration hopes to spend roughly $174 billion to facilitate the deployment of electric vehicles and also charging stations. So there's a lot that the two countries share in common in deployment of clean energy, but also innovation, I think, is an area that we might see expansion, because both the United States and South Korea, to both economies, innovation is really key in transforming the energy systems. So things like hydrogen, also energy storage technologies, having this greater collaboration could really help reduce the cost and make them much more widespread. Moreover, I'd say that the U.S.-Korea climate partnerships, particularly the closer alignment on coal policy, could help to facilitate the energy transition in Northeast Asia. In late April, the Biden administration announced a climate finance plan, not only to scale up the U.S. Public finance for climate, but then also try to end this international financing of carbon-intensive fossil fuel-based energy. And at the virtual Leaders Summit on Climate that was hosted by President Biden in late April, President Moon announced South Korea's decision to end official financing of new coal power projects overseas. In my view, that announcement was one of the biggest highlights of the summit. And I think that really has made South Korea a strong ally to the United States, especially as the Biden administration strives to urge China to rein in their coal financing abroad. Lastly, I think I only have a couple minutes left. The U.S., rising U.S. China rivalry warrants very close attention for its implications for both the scope and the substance of multilateral energy and climate cooperation in the region, as well as the nature of the bilateral, not the nature, but the scope of the U.S. ROK bilateral energy and climate cooperation. In the words of Secretary of State Tony Blinken, U.S. relationship with the growingly assertive China will be cooperative when it can be, And I think climate is one of the areas where collaborative relationships could yield the optimal pace of progress. And I think that the U.S. China joint statement on climate crisis of mid-April, and also Xi Jinping's attendance at the virtual climate summit were really hopeful signs. At the same time, though, again, in the words of Secretary Blinken, managing relationships with China is the biggest geopolitical test of the 21st century. So in the area of the geoeconomics, the U.S.-China rivalry in the clean energy technology and innovation and manufacturing is likely to heighten in the coming years because the Biden administration seeks to achieve ambitious climate goals while also revitalizing the U.S. domestic manufacturing base. So, China has already established this commanding position on supply chains for clean energy technologies like solar PV, batteries for electric vehicles, but then also for the component critical minerals and rare earth. So this coalition, and I think the significant reliance on China is a strategic concern to Washington. And I think Washington may seek to build a strong coalition with close partners with key capabilities such as South Korea, Australia, India, and perhaps also Japan to address this challenge. But in closing, the United States and South Korea have shared commitment to emissions reduction, support for clean energy technologies, as well as expertise in research and innovation. And I think how the two countries can align the scope and priorities, and perhaps also the pace of actions, are really important questions, because as I think that really affects the degree of the climate contribution out of this bilateral cooperation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Cheng Li asked me he would like to have a chance to make brief remarks, probably in 3 minutes.
Thank you. Yes,
okay,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. And well, I want to congratulate the four speakers. I think really excellent presentations and very rational, clear-minded. And I learned a great deal. And I actually encouraged by your reasoning and etc. Now, I'm quite pessimistic about the whole thing. And well, in my view, the US and China are entering the new era of constant and ruthless competition. And the core of the competition is in the area of science technology. If not wisely and carefully managed by both sides, this competition may lead to destructive confrontation within the region and the world. Now, the vicious competition certainly did not start with the Biden administration, as several of you mentioned. A year ago, the senator unveiled the bipartisan Endless Frontier Act. This is the bill to bolster US tech leadership and combat China. Last December, the United States initiated the Clean Network, primarily targeted China. More than 60 nations and 200 telecom companies representing more than 2/3 of the world's GDP publicly committed to participate. Now, make no mistake, the cause of this competition should not be attributed to only one country. From the US perspective, China's extensive violation of intellectual property rights, barriers to market access for US companies, state-sponsored economic espionage, and mercantilist tactics to gain dominance in new technology, and the global outreach through state capitalism. You can have the long list, have unfairly advantaged Chinese economic expansion. Now, interestingly, Chinese also had a similar list to accuse the United States, not entirely identical, but similar. Now, more importantly, for the first time since the end of the Second World War, the United States confronts a country with economic and technological potential that is comparable to its own. So in some areas, such as the 5G and AI, China may even have more advantages. Now, let me very quickly mention the Chinese perspective. Many of the Biden administration's recent moves indicate that a new anti-China Cold War is imminent from Beijing's perspective. Now, these actions include restructuring global industrial and supply chain, initiating the so-called chip alliances or semiconductor industry alliance, as some of the speakers mentioned, join like-minded countries to boycott the Chinese products and Chinese-sponsored events because of human rights issues, and urging EU countries to reconsider the EU-China Comprehensive Agreement on Investment. Now, the bipartisan legislation proposed in early April on the Senate floor, which is called the Strategic Competition Act of 2021, deserves great attention. And this legislation has a host of new initiatives aiming at helping the U.S. succeed in long-term ideological, military, economic, and technological competition with China. Now, if we enacted, the legislation will likely drive the Biden administration to put the emphasis on the counter-arising global China as a top priority in the foreign relations. Now, besides, Biden's infrastructure bill, as some of you mentioned, will likely emphasize competition rather than cooperation. Now, in conclusion, I think that China will certainly react very, very strongly, accelerate its own IT development. These actions and the resulting reactions or mutually reinforced fear have increasingly driving the world into a very dire situation. Now, of course, there are things that you mentioned about climate change, maybe people-to-people engagement, and maybe also the cooperation on the third-party countries, peacekeeping and etc., could provide some kind of ray of hope. But under the current atmosphere, I think both countries are really moving towards zero-sum game mindset. Over.
Wow. This is a really pessimistic, future in the, U.S. China strategic competition, which really drive us crazy. I mean, for the interest of South Korea, between these two giants. But South Korea is a kind of natural ally of the United States, and then China is adjacent to South Korea, and then also the major economic partners. Anyway, any other comments or Mary, would you like? Oh, okay, Sonia, please first. Yeah, turn on your mic, please.
Yes, thank you. It is my distinct honor to be able to participate in this forum. Let me bring in trade agendas in conjunction with the previous discussions over high-tech cooperation among the allies. I like to point it out the concept of national security in all this business. We just heard from our panelists that great powers use the concept of national security to regulate trade. I mean, economic and regulate economic interdependence and trade. And South Korea, for example, suffers from economic coercions in the case of the THAAD 4 years ago, and it is still there. And America's countervailing duties on Korea's steel and aluminum under Section 232, it is still there. Japan's tightening of export controls over chemical components crucial to the South Korean semiconductor industry, and it is still there. And all were justified in the name of the national security for United States, for China, for Japan. So the countries like South Korea are increasingly compelled to unwanted choice of either sacrifice its economic interests in favor of security or vice versa. And many other countries are facing the similar dilemmas. So I think United States and South Korea and also many other middle power really need to find ways that restrain states invoking a broader definition of national security. We may call it over-securitization, and strike a right balance. And also, we really need to distinguish economic security from the broader concept of national security in technology, in trade, and many other items. So for these countries, I think one solution could be a collective or coalitional approach to the source of threat, but it's really difficult to make that coalition against, for example, Chinese economic coercion. Ideally and promising should be a multilateral solution, the theme of today's. And in the case of trade, I think CPTPP, I think Kristen just mentioned before, is a powerful tool, I think, and it could be multipliable. And that would restrain, in the end, Chinese predation, America's protectionism, increase middle power space, and sustain the liberal trade norms. But rejoining CPTPP for the United States, Kristen just said that it's the impossibility in the near future, but hopefully after midterm election. But the South Korea, I think this is something that should be accomplished in the next administration. I don't think that the current administration will be able to, enter the CPTPP in 1 year, but it will be the next government's job. And there are economic hurdles, obviously, because Korea already have bilateral free trade agreements with 9 CPTPP members. And one big hurdle is Japan. South Korea has yet to have one. So that's a big economic hurdle, but I think it could be, manageable in the near future. And the two sides in that sense, overcome some of, I should say, the parochial, short-sighted issues of, history problems, and you get to restore the liberal multilateral order in TPP. And Korea's entry definitely will scale up CPTPP. It's a big economy, and other countries will follow up. As UK is currently, applying for the membership, and that will provide a powerful incentive for the United States to re-engage in the region with TPP entry. So I think that South Korea will really target this CPTPP as your next big project. And in doing so, you get to improve relations with Japan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And who is going to be the next? Mary, or are you?
I'm happy to speak.
Okay, yeah, please. Yes.
These are really, I like the earlier description of a sprint. I feel like I'm getting like a huge download of information. It's been terrific. The speakers have really offered a lot of food for thought. And I would just like to add some more. So what I wanted to say was that the Moon-Biden summit is a sort of a pinnacle or a focal point of the relationship between the US and South Korea, but most of the relationship between US and South Korea happens outside the national government relationship. And so I wanted to speak especially related to the sort of climate and innovation sector, speaking about the business and civil society sectors. And the first point I'd like to make on this is that the whole world actually, but especially business and civil society, has shifted their orientation rather dramatically once Biden took office, from 4 years of a reactive mode in which everybody inside the government and outside of it was trying to figure out what President Trump was going to tweet out next and what that would mean for themselves. And so there was very little long-term planning that anybody could do. And what I've noticed is that has really changed, even just since almost even before January, but certainly since January. And you see a lot more businesses and civil society organizations and other forms of organizations and governments and local governments making longer term plans for collaborative opportunities and longer term plans for their own action. And I think that makes a really big difference, particularly with respect to climate change type of investments, because those are all long-term, they require long-term commitments, and allowing the larger ecosystem to make long-term planning is a really big and important shift that we should recognize. The second piece that I wanted to sort of highlight was that both South Korea and the United States, whether officially from Biden or from the progressive parts of the Democratic Party, you have the language of the Green New Deal moving forward. And so both governments have these massive investment programs going forward in terms of building back after COVID. And they've both made very large commitments to building back better and building back greener and building back more socially just. And that has implications on the business side. We've even pre-2020, certainly up till 2019, pretty much from 2017, there's been an explosion of social and environmental green bonds and green investments. And the US and South Korea are global leaders on this, and the financial institutions and also the governments are very interested in retaining and even enhancing their global position on that. So I expect to see further cooperation between both the two governments and also especially the financial institutions on both sides around areas around green finance. The second place where I'll expect to find a lot of burgeoning cooperation and sort of frantic cooperation will be around political parties and still very liberal civil society groups that are interested in social justice issues and trying to raise the specter and hold the various governments accountable to the fact that they have promised to spend trillions and billions of dollars on green and socially just investments. And are they actually going to do that? And I suspect that there will be social and environmental organizations in the US and in South Korea that are holding their governments accountable together. And so that may make some of the governments more uncomfortable, but I think that is going to be an area where we see enhanced cooperation sort of at a people-to-people level and organization-to-organization level between civil society and in the US and South Korea. And I guess the last thing I'll mention, which is related, especially given the more pessimistic and sad prospects that our last two panelists pointed out, the big giant elephant in the room is this China problem, sort of the rising China threat, the rising strategic competition with China. And that is without a doubt going to be first, at the forefront of all of the government conversations between South Korea and the United States. But in business and in civil society, there's a lot more wiggle room around this. So a lot of the business organizations in South Korea and the US are also in China and trying to make money in China and making money with China. And also a lot of the civil society organizations, especially not so much around human rights, but especially around climate, are operating with and in collaboration with organizations in China on these issues. So I think those two sort of outside the government areas of collaboration between the US and South Korea will offer a little more wiggle room on sort of the more bleak prospect of trying to manage what China is doing in the world and try to find more ways of cooperation and collaboration and create a more positive sum way of working with China in the region. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? There is some, Greg? Okay, yes, please.
Yes, thank you. And you might want to look. Some other people have their hands up digitally. So let me just say, as a historian, I really appreciated these very concise and very informative summations of critical issues in the bilateral and multilateral relationships. But overall, I guess the impression that I have of Biden's Asia policy that comes across is not very good and is sort of being too stuck in a more traditional outlook. And this can be problematic. When it comes to China, it seems that we're stuck in a sort of bilateral rivalry mode in terms of how we conceptualize too many of the issues with China. To the extent that Biden is interested in multilateralism at all, it's mostly in multilateral security alliances directed against China. And so that's one, I think that's one area where I don't know if a Cold War framework, which is more or less what we're applying, and we hear it in political discourse in Washington again and again, will there be a new Cold War with China? I don't think that a framework that may have worked in the 70s and 80s against a very different kind of threat is really the most appropriate or best way to think about our relationship with China. And if we direct everything that we do against, against China's rise, then it's going to be counterproductive in a lot of ways. But I think I think Biden administration policy seems too backward looking, not only in terms of China, but also what a lot of you are talking about in terms of the Biden administration's approach to Japan and South Korea. It's not really multilateral at all. In fact, it doesn't seem to like multilateralism. With South Korea, there's this emphasis on, where can we cooperate bilaterally? The same thing with Japan. There's all of this, there's an emphasis on sort of the old Cold War framework, which put an emphasis, this heavy emphasis on the bilateral alliances, but didn't really try to promote or participate in more multilateral structures. And again, I think this could be problematic because I think some of the Asian countries themselves seem to be gearing towards, seem to be very interested in multilateralism. And I guess one other issue that nobody's discussed has been, since we're discussing environment and climate, is the Japan dumping of wastewater from Fukushima into the Pacific. And, this is really an issue where, again, I think the Biden administration has taken a relatively traditional approach. Japan's our ally, support its decision. But marine biologists have criticized this. Almost every other country in the Pacific, South Korea, North Korea, China, Taiwan, our adversaries and our allies have all been critical of Japan on this issue. And so, it's really the kind of thing where you wonder if the Biden administration's overall framework towards Asia isn't flexible enough, isn't creative enough. And I think we're all, I think when Biden won in November, we all collectively breathed a sigh of relief because he couldn't be worse than Trump. But now that he's in there, I think now that he's president, he really needs to look at the fact that we're in a very different era. And the traditional frameworks for American thinking about national security and about its relationships in the region, they really don't apply very well anymore. And if we stick to them, we're going to be on the wrong side of a lot of issues.
Okay. Wow, it's really surprising. The time really flies fast. So so time's up. So I'm so sorry. I'd like to ask the presenters to make a short comments within 1 minute, and in regressive order. What about Jane? You're gonna be the first.
Thank you. So in 1 minute, no, I fully agree. I'm glad that Mary Alice brought up the role of the civil society and also business communities. I think there's a lot of scope, and I think in many ways, the Biden administration is still to some extent really figuring out how to build up like all the different pieces, if you will, sort of Lego pieces, and figure out how to engage. But things like ESG, the environmental, political, and also governance issues, it's something that it really takes both business community, also civic groups, as well as official policymakers to really advance. And I think in many ways that will really require much more of a multilateral as opposed to bilateral types of engagement. So I think there's a lot of, I hope to be an optimist and I really look forward to, really seeing all the, hardworking folks on both sides of the Pacific to figure out the best approach to the regional climate and also energy transition. Climate is of course important, but really the energy transition, the type of deployment in clean energies, and yeah. So anyways, thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. Jason, please.
Okay, the green energy and climate change, what I think these agendas are like a joker, okay? Well, they are great source for bilateral and multilateral cooperation, especially between the United States and Korea. Well, the two countries are at least rhetorically sharing a lot of vision. So with two fingers crossed, I do want to see that the two countries are making progress on that point with the broader actors and broader participant stakeholders. However, when I said it may be like a joker, it joker with like a double-edged sword on hand, because it does have a thorny side. Okay, when we talk about vision, when we talk about the kind of long-term like plan, and then certainly there are many areas for dramatic cooperation. However, when it comes to the issue of standard regulation, cross-border carbon tax. And so, well, there are certainly some thorny side of it. So the real cooperation, the kind of the real solid alliance might be found at the moment when those issues are visible, tangible, and how to handle those thorny side of the agenda. That will, I guess, determine the long-term duration of the green kind of alliance between the United States and South Korea. Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Okay, Youngja, please.
So I think it is neither desirable nor possible, for the United States and China to collide in the entire technology sector, despite in the inevitable, competition and conflict in the limited sector. The cooperation between United States and China must be continued in more broad area, except for the inevitable and limited area. And based upon this collaboration behind the scene, both countries should, keep the window open to manage conflict. Of course, U.S. needs to keep pressure on China to correct, intellectual property infringement or illegal technology transfer. But I think it's not a good idea to expand export regulation or promote artificial decoupling. So I think it could be better for the technology alliance, semiconductor alliance, whatever we say, to focus more on upgrading mutual technological innovation capacity by increasing investment and cooperative R&D rather than forming a exclusive supply chain.
Okay,
that's my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Even though it's a little bit detailed, but please.
Sure, thank you. So when we think about where the U.S. and China are going, it is a difficult and thorny path ahead. And I think that the Biden administration, many other administrations, want a prosperous, self-reliant enough American economy that they continue to win elections and that the American people thrive. And if we think about that through a lens of multilateralism, you can think that pursuing How do we get there without having a bit major clash with China? Well, one possible path might be to pursue innovation, technological development, private sector cooperation in particular, that creates constituencies and creates voices that and interdependence that would push back against the nastiest and most vicious of zero-sum games. I'll wrap up there.
Okay, I'm gonna toss up the my privilege to the Yeon-ho Kim, and then I'm sorry for being late. Okay.
I'd like to encourage the attendees to submit their questions about the trade, technology, and climate change. We already have a couple of questions about the regional security cooperation. And when you type in your question in the Q&A box, please make sure to identify yourself and your affiliation. And with that, let me start the second roundtable on regional security cooperation. We're lucky to have two distinguished speakers for opening statements. Ambassador Joseph Yoon, a senior advisor at the U.S. Institute of Peace, and Professor Chae-Seung Chun at Seoul National University. Let me turn it over to Joseph Yoon, Ambassador Yoon, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? I didn't want to be like Yeon-ho. Okay. All right, good. Thank you very much. Great discussion, previous panel.
Ambassador Yoon, your audio is not working.
It's okay.
Is it working? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Is it working?
Yeah. No problem.
Okay, I see nodding head, so I assume it is working. Great discussions by previous speakers, and both on some of the regional issues that I will touch on, as well as on climate change and energy and so on. Many of you, of course, have spoken that later this week, we will have the first summit meeting between President Moon and President Biden. And so I wanted to frame my discussion on regional security issues around what it is that they will likely talk about. Of course, you will see the joint statement coming afterwards, and you will mention many issues: science and technology, climate, trade, pandemics, and so on. But my experience is that the area the leaders feel most comfortable and want to talk about are regional security issues. And in particular, in this instance, I believe their discussion will be centered around really three items. China, many of you have spoken about China before, China, Japan, and of course about North Korea. So let me briefly touch on those three issues. Some of you have said that the U.S. China relations is in a big mess, and there is no question in my mind that Biden team considers China to be their number one foreign policy and security challenge. I mean, that's not very different from where Trump administration was. And I think it is very similar in their approach, maybe with some difference in tactics from Biden to Trump. Obviously, Biden team would like to see themselves as a little bit more savvy, experienced, and smarter. But really, it is all about, number one, what I call 3 C's. Compete. How do you compete with China? Number 2, how do you confront with China? And then, do we go in the direction of conflict, containment, or what Biden would like to see is more cooperation? And many of you have spoken about cooperation. So to me, Trump team emphasized containment, while Biden team would like to see more cooperation. So that's the key difference in their approach, I would say. The other big difference in implementing their strategy is, of course, Biden team emphasizes working with friends and allies. And of course, South Korea for Biden is both a friend and an ally. And so their big ask, Biden's big ask in his meeting on May 21 will be, can South Korea join the like-minded countries in order to push back on Chinese expansive claims geographically, push back on Chinese positions on places like Hong Kong, Taiwan, Xinjiang, and so on, and push back on ideas such as democracy and human rights. The most obvious manifestation of this ask, this request from Biden to President Moon will be, can South Korea do more or even join what we now call the Quad? And I think that's going to be the critical request from Biden to Moon. And of course, it's quite understandable that this will put President Moon in a difficult place. But of course, summits are where you have difficult conversations. And to what extent, how President Moon responds, not just on the day. I mean, I don't think anyone expects President Moon to respond right away. But the thinking has been evolving in South Korea because, of course, Koreans know that this request is coming. And I think the Koreans will have to go some ways to meet that, because this is not something that's going to stop after May 21. It's going to continue and continue until there is some degree of commonality in how Washington and Seoul sees China. The second issue is, of course, Japan. It is no secret that South Korea and Japanese relations have probably been the poorest certainly since I've been working on it, which is about 1985. And a lot of people say the relations between Tokyo and Seoul is the worst since normalization. And this is a terrible thing for the Biden administration. If you remember, really the President Moon is the second VIP to come to Washington. The first VIP to come to Washington was Prime Minister Suga. So this shows you not just the importance of Asia policy for the Biden administration, but the importance of Japan and South Korea, the two critical allies in Asia for the United States. So how to improve the relationship between Japan and South Korea is really, I think, key item for Biden to accomplish in his discussions with Suga and now in his discussions with President Moon. And that, again, poses a difficult issue. The US has always played a big part in Seoul, Tokyo relations, but that influence is not as great as it was before, but still substantial. And Biden really wants to see himself and wants everyone to see him as a bit of a peacemaker between Japan and South Korea. And so I think this will be a very key ask. It is a difficult task because, of course, Japanese issues in South Korea and South Korean issues in Japan are very political. Elections are won and lost on how you deal with your neighbor. And Japan, the Prime Minister Suga will have to face his electorate very soon. And of course, less than a year from now, there will be presidential election. So I do believe some things are being worked out quietly behind the scene, but how much both Suga and Moon can do pretty much depends on domestic political constraints. And then third, I want to briefly touch on North Korean issues. And this is, of course, the big ask from President Moon to President Biden. That is, can the US show more cooperative diplomacy? Can the US be a little bit more aggressive in searching for solutions that could bring about not just denuclearization, but some kind of peace agreement with North Korea? And we have all seen Biden's North Korea policy review. I mean, it is pretty much what we expect. There are some good parts to it. I think good parts as far as South Korean government is concerned include, the statement that it will, what US will approach will be a kind of a step-by-step approach to denuclearization. I think Tony Blinken called it calibrated approach. I mean, the same as step-by-step phased approach. In other words, they don't think there is a big deal or a big one deal that you can get. I think that's being very realistic. And also the senior Biden administration folks, they really don't talk about CVID anymore, complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization, because they know that's not possible. And they know complete denuclearization is not gonna come soon, or immediately. So they're thinking of it as a long-term project, which I think is quite much more realistic than previous administration, who really wanted a big deal, want a prior commitment, and so on. But as far as President Moon is concerned, there are things missing from the Biden's new approach, and that is, there is nothing about improving relations between US and North Korea. There is nothing about ending the kind of, war state, because if you remember, the Korean War was concluded with an armistice, not a peace agreement. And there is nothing about working towards normalizing the diplomatic relations, nothing about a peace treaty. So there is a big missing chunk as far as President Moon is concerned. So I think he will want to see much more aggressive diplomacy, much more contact between Washington and Pyongyang, and that will be his main ask. Of course, all of this on North Korea depends on how North Koreans react, and we don't know that yet. And of course, US has said, the Biden team has tried to communicate with North Korea, but so far without much success. So it remains to be seen. So I do think these three serious issues, China, Japan, and North Korea, will form the bulk of the discussion and security talks between Biden and Moon. So Professor Kim, why don't I leave it there and listen to the others. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Yun. Do you hear me, everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Unexpected technical glitch. So let me turn it over to Chesson.
Thank you. My subject is a new security architecture in Asia and the U.S. ROK security cooperation, especially regarding multilateral security cooperation. I have 3 points. First, regarding South Korea's core security interests. As we expect, the first Biden-Moon summit meeting this Friday, making sure that two countries are on the same page regarding security interests will be essential. So the basic question is, what will be the constant basis for the future RK-US alliance? We talk about security interests, minds, as we express in the expression like-minded, strategy, situation, but I think most fundamentally, identity matters. So there could be short-term divergence in defining security interests between two countries, but in the long run, there is convergence and commonalities in terms of identity between two countries, the Americans and South Koreans. So we have to pay attention to the South Korean public's core interests and values that South Koreans wants to protect, and their perception of external threats. Then, in terms of core value regarding Asian security architecture, I guess the U.S. South Korea share a lot. Then South Korea's security interests are, first, the maintenance of military status quo in Asia and the change based on international law. Second, to foster the function of various multilateral fora for dispute settlement and policy coordination. And third, to develop new norms and rules in the gray zones and gray areas with the active participation of South Korea as a liberal country. Then in short, South Korea is a liberal democratic middle power whose basis for development depends on free trade and norm-based international order. The next point is about future Asian security regional architecture. What kind of security network the U.S. and its allies will have in the future to balance against China and encourage China to conform to the existing rules and norms? Some suggest in the States democratic coalition, whereas others these days proposes concert of great powers, including China and Russia, for strategic coordination. Regarding security network, so far, the U.S. alliance system since 1951 has been defined by the so-called hub and spoke system, as you all know. But some people with the Trump administration expressed the hope that they wanted to establish a collective security system in Asia, possibly replacing the hub and spoke alliance system. But now, under the rubric of Indo-Pacific strategy, the Biden administration defined China as the most severe strategic competitor and develops a security military strategy to balance against China. Both the Trump administration and Biden administration focus policy resources on coping with Chinese rapid military modernization. So we hear a lot of strategies such as A2AD, offset strategy, Pacific Deterrence Initiative, and multi-domain operations. They are being employed to accomplish that goal. They are very efficient, I guess, evolving strategic concepts, and as proven in many war simulations, the US still and will prevail over China in case of contingencies. But without a clear picture of future security architecture to embrace various interests of Asian powers, there is a misunderstanding or confusion regarding the role of security institutions such as Quad. Now the Biden administration has made it explicit that Quad is an informal, open, value-based, ad hoc platform for cooperation among Asian democracies in various issue areas, which are not directly related to security and military domain. Quad-centered collaboration among other Asian countries and some European countries, such as the UK and France, may help develop norm-based order in the region, influencing Chinese calculation. The fact that Quad is not about all or nothing strategic choice, that's a good news. It is not something to replace existing alliance structure. But from South Korea's perspective, still we have a lot to think about. The US will need a more innovative and persuasive security architecture to deal with Chinese military challenges. And for the time being, the existing hub and spoke alliance system will be the cornerstone of the US Asian security architecture. Then there are more serious issues regarding the US ROK security cooperation than South Korea's participation in the Quad. How to define the very nature of security threats from China and share them, find a reasonable division of function utilizing the US ROK alliance, and the link alliance with the ROK, US, and Japan trilateral security cooperation and other multilateral mechanisms. Those are important complex issues. So defining common security interests and threat perception will be the most fundamental issue between two countries, which should be addressed in the summit meeting between two presidents. Lastly, shortly about North Korea. Yono told me that I have to deal with the issue from a multilateral perspective. So there are many uncertainties regarding the Biden administration's North Korea policy review as of now, which the cooperation from allies may resolve. As we talk about multilateral security institutions today, the question will be how helpful the multilateral approach will be in dealing with the North Korean nuclear issue. The multilateral framework, as tried in the six-party talks, will be profitable in several aspects. First, bilateral negotiations, especially between the U.S. and North Korea, will still be essential and dominant under this setting. The multilateral setting. Second, as the U.S.-China strategic competition becomes severe, the cooperation between two countries may not be accessible when dealing with North Korean nuclear issue. Biden administration proposes non-proliferation, climate change, global health, as you all know, as mutually beneficial issue areas. But the prospect of bilateral cooperation is not that promising so far. On the other hand, if we set up a multilateral setting for North Korean nuclear issue, then that may help press two countries to reach an agreement in dealing with this kind of issue. Lastly, the formal participation of Japan in dealing with the North Korean nuclear crisis may pave the way for closer cooperation between South Korea and Japan. Confidence building between South Korea and Japan in area of security and historical animosities is not easy. And the participation of Japan may give a chance to Japan to correct the misunderstanding of South Korea's strategic intentions. Okay, let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chae-sung. We have around 10 minutes for this second roundtable, but before we open it up for Q&A. And I also like to invite all the participants to join this second roundtable in a broader context, even if you're coming from technology, science, or climate change. With that, I think Sung-han is ready to make some comments. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Yan-ho. Really enjoyed listening to our speakers' presentation. First of all, when it comes to multilateralism, we usually think of multilateral security cooperation among different parties, different countries. But now, it seems to me it is changing to a kind of a coalition building among the like-minded countries or coalition of the willing. Now, Biden administration is uttering a united front against China with the friends and allies. So the symbol of the Chinese multilateralism is BRI, while United States is IPS, and Quad is constituting one important pillar of IPS. By the way, the overlapped area between BRI and IPS is Southeast Asia. So probably Biden administration, even though it is not going to be this week, but at some point in the future, United States will be asking ROK to make a very meaningful contribution to Southeast Asia, so that they can come up with kind of a division of labor or burden in dealing with that kind of a frontal area for U.S. China strategic competition. Against this backdrop, we need to think of the possible or feasible prospects for Northeast Asian security cooperation or something like that. In other words, whether United States and or China will recognize kind of a added value for such a sub-regional kind of a forum, other than kind of a region-wide kind of a multilateralism. So I think we are very likely to face a very critical juncture to see whether this kind of a sub-regional multilateralism will be realized or not in the coming months or years. Ambassador Joseph Yun made an excellent remark. By the way, the other day I read the editorial of the Global Times of China. Since I have been being blamed as too much, tilted toward the U.S. position in my country, I usually start the day by reading the Chinese newspaper. The other day, the editorial pointed out actually impressively contrasted Trump and Biden's China policy. Trump was brutal and unpredictable. Biden is extensive and predictable. Trump was obsessed with the confrontation and containment, while Biden is combining 3 C's, confrontation, competition, and cooperation. While Ambassador Yun just mentioned cooperation for Biden. China believes Biden is combining all of those 3 C's. About North Korea policy, this is the critical subject. I think 2 subjects for President Moon will be North Korea and vaccines. How to make United States come to the negotiating table with North Korea. That is one. And how to make vaccine supply more stable and steady. So those 2 primary issues will be put on the table in my judgment. I don't disagree on the phased approach. We are all sitting on the chair. If we want to walk, well, we have to stand up first. So in that sense, I don't disagree on the need for the phased approach. But my problem is how the first phase will be structured. That is my concern. Yeah. So how, for example, to trade North Korea's nuclear freeze for what? North Korea wouldn't try to accept nuclear freeze without lifting of core UN Security Council sanctions resolutions that was demanded by North Korea at Hanoi and even in Singapore. So the question is whether United States is ready to give them all to North Korea. Otherwise, United States is ready to prepare some other alternatives, like political incentives rather than economic incentives for North Korea. So this kind of issues should be consulted between Seoul and Washington intensively. Otherwise, we are very likely to recognize North Korea as a de facto nuclear weapon state. Again, I want to emphasize North Korea is no longer relying on so-called asymmetric deterrence, nuclear deterrence strategy. North Korea's strategy has been changed from the asymmetrical deterrence strategy to more like becoming a regional nuclear weapon state like Pakistan, which requires a very different deterrent strategy, which also requires very close consultation between Seoul and Washington. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sung-han. I guess we have a couple of more experts. I think Shinhwa just raised her hand. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Both US and China put forward multilateralism, but we all agree here, in reality, they are competing against each other to bring more countries to their own side. So that's not multilateralism, but multilateralist strategies. That's why Biden's strategy to restore liberal international order is very exclusive to countries that do not participate in the multilateral democratic alliance as it aims to counter China. And in that sense, probably we have to think about Quad. But US policy toward China appears to be increasing hardline since the start of Biden's term. So recent interim NSS refers to so-called position of strength in China policy and to a whole of government approach. And Biden even began referring system competition between US and China. So in their circumstance, other countries, including Seoul, are in a strategic dilemma of choosing between them. So-called multilateral cooperation, which is envisioned to function as a regional mechanism that support the liberal international order in the Indo-Pacific, is also likely to turn into a venue for a clash of geopolitical competition between the two great powers. So in order to realize the rule-based order, still I believe it's more desirable to keep liberal international order, although it should be more upgraded and elaborated. And countries must unite and work together to counter China's assertive actions, predatory behaviors. But to this end, reaching a consensus between the countries irritated by China is essential to successfully establishing a regional security mechanism. A prospective start would be amending the Korea-Japan bilateral relations, as some scholars today was mentioning about. The longer-term task is how to induce China to this order, I believe. And China appears to prefer ASEAN way, that is open and loose multilateralism, and it opposes anything legally binding and exclusive. So regional states must come together to find ways to persuade China. Incentives, not concessions, will help China, serving to its national interest, consider to participate. So the future of the liberal international order is expected to be influenced by US willingness and capability to continue to provide global public goods. But at the very same time, the support of solidarity of the international community led by so-called middle power country in the region is necessary. So in this process, sophisticated and also like very generous strategies that utilizing all players should be developed. In this process, interests of various countries should be respected without leaving any single country excluded or discounted. And very briefly, in interest of time, let me briefly talk about Korea-US alliance. We all concerned about the current alliance is faltering, if not collapsing. However, I want you to remember that during the Nomuyan regime, anti-US sentiment was great due to the politically calculated dichotomy of nation first, 민족공조, vis-a-vis foreign independence, 외세의존. But the recent polls show that the majority of Koreans, more than 90%, now think that alliance with the US is important for national security and prosperity. Probably many believe the North Korean nuclear threat and military aggression and China's predatory behavior is more concerned. Therefore, although experts point out that South Korea-US alliance is faltering due to the current Moon administration's North Korea-centered and China-conscious foreign policy, it is necessary to pay attention to the analyst that considering this recent trend in public opinion in Korea, populist Moon administration does not confront the United States compared to the Nomuyan period or put forward divided logic such as nations versus foreign independence. So in this context, I hope the upcoming Korea-US summit this Friday should serve as an important opportunity to eliminate the strategic discord and identify common interest. So I'll stop here.
Thank you. We have about 15 minutes left, and I think we're trying to make something impossible possible, and I think we can do it. So before we open it up for the Q&A, let me ask Ambassador Yoon and Chesung to respond to the comments you have heard so far. Let me give you 1 minute each.
Thank you very much. Excellent comments. I think let me just respond to some of the things that Professor Kim Sung-han has said, especially on North Korea, which is quite interesting. I agree with him that that the first step, how you approach North Korea, is very important. Remember, there is a saying in Korea, if you get the top button, the first button right, everything will fall into place. The first button is very right. But also, we really don't know how the negotiations will turn out until we have them. And that's the challenge with North Koreans. In my personal view, you start negotiating based on what was on the table last time. So on the table last time is what happened in Hanoi in 2019, in February 2019, where the North Koreans offered to get rid of all of the Yongbyon facilities in return for sanctions, getting rid of all the UN sanctions since 2016. So that's on the table. Clearly, that was acceptable to North Koreans, and I would imagine it's still acceptable to North Koreans, but not to the US. So the job of the negotiator in this particular instance is to try to get a deal that was better than Hanoi for both the American negotiator and for the North Korean negotiator. So start from that basis and work up. And again, I completely agree with former Vice Foreign Minister Kim. You gotta get the first button right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason.
Yes, because there are questions about North Korea. We know that from Kim Yo-jong's statement in July last year, what is the condition for resuming the stalled talks, which is the United States should show some signs of changing so-called North Korea hostility policy. It is not just about lifting economic sanctions, it's very political. And they say that we are not just dealing with President Trump at the time, we are dealing with whole America. So America as a whole should show some signs of confidence toward North Korea. So now North Korea is waiting not for just the conditions for the very detailed first round of talk. They are waiting for some changes of attitude from their own perspective. Maybe they are trying to make full use of that situation, but we have to understand what their feelings after the Hanoi fail is. And then I think what we can show is that we need to show the very long-term perspective about the relationship, especially between United States and North Korea. And there were questions in the Q&A box that can we make a diplomatic normalization with Pyongyang? Maybe we will fail, but we should be prepared to suggest a very long-term, very detailed future for North Korean leadership. And they always talk about security guarantee, and it's not really about military or security in terms of their state system. It's a security in terms of Kim family's actual and physical life. So if South Korea and United States should pay attention to their own, security concerns, I'm not saying that we have to guarantee them, but if we can show some signs of trust from their own perspective, then there might be some more positive signs from North Korea how to, reopen the negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a couple of questions from the viewers, mostly about the security cooperation. So to be balanced, let me take the privilege of a moderator and insert one questions coming from different angles. So vaccine cooperation that we briefly discussed. So my question to the panelists, the roundtable participants, is whether the vaccine cooperation between the United States and Korea and the other countries involved in the region will be workable, and if so, how will that be linked to the regional cooperation? Any potential linkage to the security cooperation, for example? Whoever wants to go first, just let me know.
It's a very hard question. I didn't get into the mindset of President Moon, but his mindset would be as follows. We need vaccines. We need stable supply of vaccines. Then what can ROK give to the United States? We need to take a careful look at recent ROK's decision to join a very interesting working group of a Quad, that is New Technology Working Group. In addition to climate change and health security working group. New technology, this is really something, probably Professor Pei-Yong Jia knows better than I do. This is a very sensitive area, which requires further specific actions even after the summit comes to an end. That means joining, for example, the Clean Network, and ROK should, show something, like a cooperative gesture with respect to the production of so-called system semiconductors, construction of semiconductor, companies and factories within the United States or something. So this kind of how to structure this kind of the sets for give and take is going to be related to this kind of a question.
Thank you. If there's yes, Cheson.
Also, I'm just following up Song Han's perspective. Before he already rightly mentioned about the key points. I think the vaccine will surely be discussed, and some agreement, I guess, will be made, pretty sure. But a vaccine is like a symbol at this moment. And for the South Korea, for the U.S. part, it's actually, this kind of the private sector deal. Okay, the U.S. companies may expedite the provision of vaccine. Well, that is not free. Korea will certainly purchase it, but if it goes beyond the next stage, kind of maybe the next stage vaccine, and if South Korea can get some license to produce further vaccine, etc., then there will be some more progress. But still, the key is President Moon has a very urgent political necessity to guarantee the purchase of vaccine to satisfy domestic constituencies. Nowadays, the vaccine is becoming a pretty sensitive political, the flip side of the government. So in that sense, he has to satisfy the domestic the audience. But eventually, linking Jo Yoon's point that eventually what United States may draw is how to link this vaccine and related public health and pandemic issue to the regional security architecture, such as the Quad Plus, and if it really covers a number of non-traditional security agenda, including the vaccine and the coverage for the next stage like the pandemic, well, it might be COVID-19 or something similar to that. If the U.S. is pressing the building that kind of the regional security architecture and link the vaccine issue, then that will be kind of the different angle to look at this vaccine agenda. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a couple of questions, at least I think 2 questions about the sanctions on North Korea. So first one is from Stephen Costello, non-resident visiting scholar at GWIKS. Does the Biden team think the extreme sanctions from 2016 are usable leverage to be maintained during 2021 and 2022, or will those sanctions be on the table in return for a robust early deal that gets inspectors back in caps on fissile material? And another question about the sanction is from Hazel Smith. Her question is, does the panel think that relevant U.S. officials are benefiting today from nuanced and careful analysis of the DPRK? For example, we see little attention to the policy implications, the 2017 oil and other sanctions that have been causative in the very large falls in food production from 2018 onwards.
Maybe I will have the first crack at those questions, Professor Kim.
Yes.
Sanctions, regarding Steve Costello's questions. Sanction relief is what is desperately wanted by North Korea. And so when someone wants it, you have leverage. So sanctions will, of course, continue to be used by Biden administration as something they can give. But at the same time, I think Steve's point is right. Sanctions are not as biting as they were in 2017, and certainly compared to that. Why? Because sanctions erode over time. You have to keep on doing new sanctions in order for sanctions to be effective, and so they naturally erode. And second reason they have been eroding is because China and Russia have not been upholding them to the maximum extent as specified by UN Security Council resolutions. So they are not as biting as they were. So I think that that's the dilemma of Biden's approach now is, you have sanctions as lever and you don't have much else to give to North Korea. And so you really don't know what to expect until you begin to talk to them on exchanging views. I mean, that reminds me of a quote by famous boxer Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, So that's the kind of situation that we're in. And so what North Koreans will ask, I agree completely with Professor Chan. They have a lot of long-term goals. So it is really imperative that US side come to be in a comfortable position on how to approach them. And I think that leads to Hazel Smith's question. How much does the US officials who work on these issues know about North Korea? Unfortunately, very little, and that's certainly my experience. And again, you really don't know what is on their mind until you begin to talk to them. And also you don't know whether what their negotiators are saying is what they truly want. Because again, short-term goals really cloud what they want in the long term. So try to put those two together, in my view, is always difficult because you want to resolve short-term goals, which may be sanctions in a very specific area. If you remember in six-party talks, it was all about Banco Delta Asia, And then once that was resolved, you realize that there are bigger, far worse problems to be resolved, which was essentially inspections and verifications of their nuclear program. They wouldn't do that, you know? So it is a difficult issue. And I think my view is that price of opening the door to true negotiations has gone up. Naturally, it's gone up because North Korea has that much more capability in nuclear weapons and in missile deliveries than they had before. And whether a Biden administration recognize how much higher that price is, I'm not so sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Yoon. Is there anybody who want to give the last word for this roundtable discussion? Because we are almost, we have run out of time. So, Hung-gyu, I think you can answer your question you raised for the panelists, which is, what is the end state of the U.S. China strategic rivalry in the Biden's mind? You're muted.
Yeah, this is the exact question I want to raise actually to my American colleagues. And then, during the Trump administration, I was not really sure of, what is the end state of he really mind. And then, but in the Biden administration, he seems to have a certain, goal obvious, and then, but still not sure. So I would like to listen to, from my American friends, my another question is actually what does it mean of the midterm election in 2022 of the United States, to the U.S. Foreign policies, domestic politics, and the outcome and the consequences of the midterm elections. So this is my current questions actually I myself raise, and it is not necessary to be optimistic actually. The consistency of the U.S. policy to China questioned actually. And so then it caused lots of trouble actually to the South Korea's foreign policies if it is not consistent. So that's really I want raise question and then listen to from my American colleagues, but their time is really running out of so. I think I have to collect more money and then reopen this dialogue sooner or later. This is what.
Yes, thank you. I will definitely keep cooperating and seeking for another opportunity to discuss this very important topic. And with that, I think we have to conclude today's webinar. So I'd like to thank all the distinguished speakers for joining us today, especially our Korean speakers for staying up late at night for us. I think GWIKS has become famous for that, and hopefully it didn't give any bad impression to our Korean friends. And I'd also like to thank our technical team for putting this together, including Jean and Shruti. And of course, thank you all for joining us. With that, let me conclude today's webinar. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care,
감사합니다.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.